let me talk about Ethiopia. So my job now is actually, I actually work as director of a new organization called UK Welcomes Refugees, because I've been in this movement for a while, and we just founded an organization. I was appointed director, which is exciting. So we are just building this organization, and then it's going to be part of building what we call a welcoming United Kingdom. So I'm going to be part of this movement, which is exciting, and I'm really excited to take that onward. On Ethiopia, my beautiful Ethiopia had about four, I can say, in my lifetime, it had about four opportunities. The one in 1974, the one in 1992, the one in 2005, and 2018. 1974 was the change, when the imperial was actually thrown out. When there was this wonderful actually revolutionary activities around Ethiopia. Andrew earlier mentioned about it, land to the tillers. That was the issue, land to the tillers, land to the farmers. It was an exciting movement that actually brought the youngsters of those days on board, and my dad included, who kind of really were in favor of the movement. I was too young. I was probably around 4 or 5, I think. So I was too young, but I could still remember, the energy. But what happened was, it was stolen. The military stole it, and because of that, what happened? There was massive killing in Ethiopia under what's called Red Terror and then White Terror. Red Terror by the military, White Terror by those who were actually opposing the military. So there were terrorism in Ethiopia, killing of youngsters. We lost lots of young people who could have really changed Ethiopia forever. And the military, which was powerful then, clung onto power for 17 years, 17 solid years. And so from them taking power, I actually went all the way to finishing university. By the time I was going to finish university, that was when the then president, Mengistu Haile Mariam, who now lives in Zimbabwe, just actually left Ethiopia. So we lost a very important generation then, and a very good opportunity then as well. And then came the next generation, which is 1992. 1992, those who were leading the movement of the 1992 change in Ethiopia, they all have come through guns, through struggles. It's not non-violent struggle. It was violent struggle, for that matter. Even so, the one of 1974, initially it was non-violent. It was non-violent. It was purely young-led socialists, mostly socialist in principle, who really wanted to see the majority having access to resources. Land to the tiller, which was important. It was the most important slogan of those days, land to the tiller. The ones in 1992, they were kind of led by one ethnic group, but it kind of looked, different ethnic groups. It was mostly led by the Tigrayans in the north, which had actually support from the Eritrean Liberation Front. So the Tigrayan Liberation Front, TPLF, in cooperation with the Eritrean people, the ones in power still in Eritrea, they started the movement, but were actually accompanied by others as they came down to Addis Ababa. And that included the Oromo Liberation Movement. So initially, what was surprising was TPLF allied with Eritrea, and then now they are forced, as you probably would know. So they kind of favored everything the Eritrean movement really wanted, but in politics we say there's no permanent enemy and permanent friend. So when it comes to self-interest, the self-interest of the presidents of then, the leaders of then, they came into conflict, which was so disappointing because we lost a big number of youngsters once again, because of the war between Ethiopia and Eritrea. And that was really massive, especially because when you lose youngsters who could actually contribute to the betterment of your country, it's a big deal. But that's not got impact on the leadership. The elites are still they were still in power. And then came they have been in power for quite a while. They have been in power for quite a while. There has been lots of protesters, and then, but there was a bit of opening at some point around 2003, 2004. So I used to work for the government then. I was in the Ethiopian Postal Service. I was the head of operations department. I was leading the Ethiopian Express Mail Service, which is international, and I could see change was coming, because I had the opportunity to meet with ministers because they were very close. So I had a minister probably one up. So I was very close to a minister, and I could see that. I could see that they were about to accept the change. But all of a sudden, things unexpected happened. The kind of light we saw, the lights we thought was coming to Ethiopia, the light we saw at the end of the tunnel was kind of really crushed. And I remember the bad days when about 70,000 people were actually thrown into jail because the government decided, no, this is not, because they didn't expect. They probably get wrong information. That's what I understand. They get wrong information, and then they think, especially the ones in power, think they have put the best, so they can actually win it easily. And when it came to the election, people actually voted, and they voted for change. In Addis, where I was born and raised, they lost all the seats, but disappointingly, the same night, a state of emergency was declared. But on the day results were announced, and everything went under the control of the then Prime Minister Meles Zenawi. That was very frightening, and it was even frightening for people like me, who were very vocal, who were very open, but working for the government. Whilst you are working for the government, you are meant to actually respect everything the government does. But because of the opening, that's what we always say. We just thought it was for real. That was when I had to actually leave Ethiopia. But it's unfortunate because I used to travel a lot. Even in those days, I traveled to most of African countries and Europe because of my position. But at the end of 2005, I left for the United Kingdom and then went back to Ethiopia. And that was the worst moment in my entire life. No, it's not my entire life, because there was another worst moment. I was detained. And I was actually picked from the streets. I was in a car, I was stopped, I didn't know what was happening. And then I was just taken to a center, which I could never remember. And I said, what's happening? You were in the United Kingdom most recently, and you've been writing a lot. Yes, I used to write, but that I wrote that when I was allowed. And you've been meeting this and that. You've been meeting Amnesty and others in London, everything. And they say, oh my God. And unfortunately, to make it even more disappointing, because I was only married to my wife probably for about a year and a half, and I only had my son. So I say, my God, I thought life was changing, and it's not happening. So I had to make one of the toughest decisions in my entire life, just to leave Ethiopia. There were two countries I was meant to go. One was the United States, where I had connections. I used to work in American embassy in the good old days. So I was a bit privileged back home in those days, you know, in that terms, because working in American embassy was a big deal on its own. Say, okay, and then United Kingdom, I had a visa for the UK, but I had to come here. So ever since, I was actually fighting as a diaspora. So that diaspora movement, the campaign in the diaspora, was the one that kind of really brought me to you in Boston and helped me meet the likes of Bekele and others, the wonderful folks I met in Boston. So why the diaspora? So the diaspora was really important for me, and partly because the diaspora was for Ethiopia. When we fought, we were for Ethiopia, for one Ethiopia, for a better Ethiopia, for a democratic Ethiopia, and for hopeful Ethiopia. That was our actually interests. That's why we kind of really brought ourselves on board. But at the same time, we thought we could help the movement back home financially. Support, you know, because, you know, there is resource with the diaspora somehow. And we thought, you know, we could be in a position to have the likes of a good media outlet, you know, which is now, we have got one actually very powerful, but now we have got many. One in the US, which was actually in the US and then based in the United Kingdom, the media outlet, that was actually having impact on Ethiopia, the Ethiopian satellite TV, which is now one of the most powerful in Ethiopia. So we're supporting that. And I was actually working as a board member in London. And then, so 1974, 1992, and around 2003, 2004, I'm going to show you a slide, because around 90, there was massive protest in Ethiopia. I'm going to bring, so you can see my slide. I'm going to concentrate here actually pre-2018, post-2018 a bit later, but you know, this was it. This was the most important moment, the protest. So this is one of the tactics used in Ethiopia, almost everywhere. So the one up is youngsters and almost everybody in country. The other one was students on campus, and athletes, athlete Lelisa, who actually did this at Olympics in Brazil, which was really very powerful because the whole world knew about Ethiopia. He is one of the most prominent athletes in Ethiopia. He did it, and the symbol they used. So this symbol was actually a symbol of peaceful protest in Ethiopia. So everywhere, the youngsters have some sort of activity. So they have it, and then you know it's facing. And so it was mostly used around the world. So it's really good. I kind of want to share to you why, what type of tactics we kind of used. But the diaspora, as I said, was really keen, number one, to find funds for political parties back home, and kind of convince the movement so that the wider movement really concentrates on the wider united Ethiopia. That's number one. Prosperous Ethiopia, number two. Democracy, which is important, and tolerant Ethiopia. So we kind of really concentrate around this as diaspora. You know, how can we help? How can we help the movement? Because sometimes you kind of know a lot, but you don't know, because folks on the ground know much better. They know it. You know, Mumbi earlier mentioned about her protest to her network provider. I don't understand, so I don't know about all those things. The only thing I can do is to kind of help her to actually take that forward, use that opportunity to kind of widen the movement. So the diaspora was trying to kind of really raise money as much as possible, voluntarily, which is important, because when you go into non-violent activism, one of the most important thing is You just do it voluntarily, and it's just because you believe that's going to be contributing to the wider collective us. So 1992, 2005, and then, you know, the protests you kind of saw earlier, the youngsters are really giving their lives, the diaspora contributing financially, with knowledge and so on, so forth, experience and so on and so forth, brought the change in 2018. The 2018 change, which brought Prime Minister Abiy in power, was one of the most momentous, because number one, we didn't, you know, this is what I call, how could we manage expectation? We didn't expect it. We didn't think that was going to happen. And it took me about, let's say, it took me about 3-4 months to really officially say, oh, yes, this is a government that's going to really make a change. So 2018, unexpectedly, so there was a push inside the government, but unexpectedly, somehow Prime Minister Abiy came to power. Dr. Abiy, you know, has got different, what do you call it, skills and hats, for that matter, that could really help him to be the prime minister. Number one, he has been in the government for quite a while. He has been minister for many years. He was a military who actually even went to Rwanda for peace work. He has been writing. He speaks many languages, and at the heart of everything he does is peace. So that was not easy, because in a country that's been actually cracked down by force for many years, having a very, that's why they called him, a very soft prime minister, was tough. But the euphoria among Ethiopians and the diaspora was massive. So between around April, it took about December 2018, I can't tell you the support he had almost all over the world. So he went in the US, he was in the US, he was in Europe. So I organized one, so I kind of chaired the Ethiopian diaspora movement in the United Kingdom, and then took them all the way to Germany to meet with the prime minister. So we met him in a stadium, you know, imagine. And the ones in the US, both in DC, Los Angeles, and Minnesota, there were so massive actually welcoming rallies. And then so almost everybody was on board, because he was a bit different character. And what makes him even more interesting is, you know, Ethiopia earlier, Verda mentioned about religion. Ethiopia is, you know, a country of religions. We've got all religions, I could say. The three Abrahamic religions have been there for a while. Then we've got Pentecostals, you know, all the religions I can say, but, you know, it's mostly led by Orthodox Christians who have been in power for quite a while. But we do have a big, what do you call it, Muslims in Ethiopia, mostly Sunni Muslims. What makes this guy interesting was actually he comes from the two. His mom was a Christian, and his dad was a Muslim. So you know, and then he was a Protestant, religion-wise. So, and he has got, you know, he has got many hats that really makes him interesting. But the challenge is, everybody wants to say he is mine. You see, who is mine? So this is what I call, how could he actually meet expectations? And then what makes him once again interesting was, even though he comes, you know, he is actually mostly Oromo by ethnicity, his wife is Amhara. So the Amharas and Oromos are the majority in Ethiopia. For those who may not know, but the Oromos are the majority, and then comes the Amhara. So he kind of has lots actually on board. So that kind of really helped him as a sort of unifier. But as time went, it was tough to manage expectations. And the expectation of the diaspora, I don't know why, but was even discouraging for me. There are somebody you can see it from a distance. It was so discouraging. You cannot, Rome was not built in a day. You need to give them time. We don't have the institutions. We didn't have a proper, election board. Yeah, can mention about the elections earlier, that they have in Israel every now and then the prime minister wins. And I trust he won democratically, when you see the election in Israel. But in Ethiopia, we never had, proper democracy. The only one we had was the one in 2005. So we needed to have institutions that are important, the legal institutions, the police, everything. That really needs time. But you cannot expect change to happen overnight. And Ethiopia is a very big country, very big country. It's got 110 million people. It's one of the biggest in Africa size-wise, and about 80 nations and nationalities. It's massive. And managing expectation, this is the big deal. That's one of the areas I really concentrate these days. How could you manage expectations? So managing expectations was tough on the side of both the government and the people. So then came, what do you call it? A bit of internal conflicts. And through the process, the Tigrayans, who were in power for many years, who were deposed by Abiy and co, actually decided to live in, in Tigray. So they just left Addis. So they were economically powerful. They were powerful military-wise. They had almost everything. They now decided to be there. So they were no more accountable to the central government. That was a bit of a challenge. So it's important to know all those things. And then there are people who are disfranchised. Those who thought, it was their time. It was their turn to kind of be on power, and they were disappointed again and started to say, okay, this is not my prime minister. You see, this is not my prime. He's no more representing my ethnic group, my interests. And unfortunately, some thought actually there would be better prime ministers than the prime minister himself was, because the problem is they didn't know how tough it is, because they have never tested it. So some decided to actually go back from Ethiopia, from the diaspora to Ethiopia, to kind of take part in this in the journey. But ethnicity started to take, deep roots. So even though there are many others, people like myself, who kind of think, want to see the bigger picture, there are always others who kind of know my ethnicity comes first. And that was not initially the thinking we had when we had the change around 2018. But as time went by, oh, my ethnic group is not still in power. The number of ministers in power, this from this ethnic group and not from my ethnic group. And you cannot have, actually, Ethiopia has got, as I said, about 80 ethnic nations and nationalities. You cannot have 80 ministers to lead the country. So you should have the best talents. That's how I see it. But at the same time, we have to give them time until an election comes, the next election, and prepare for that election so that you convince folks on the ground, take power, take charge, and take it forward. So, as I said, it's been tough. And most recently, as things really come very close, there have been a couple of serious incidents in Ethiopia. And the most recent one being the killing of one of the most prominent singers in Ethiopia, who is actually an Oromo. but who I believe is a unifier, because he spoke always about unity, about oneness, about one human family. But he only spoke and sang in Romania. And the fact that he sang it, because he often says, you know, I can sing in one language, but I can be in love. That's what, in his own words, I even listen to songs from Mali. That's what he says. So people love music. And if you listen to his music, you'll be surprised. It's amazing. Because I've shared this with my friends in the United Kingdom and in the US. You know, here's his music, just listen to him to see how interesting this guy was. But the killing of this wonderful person triggered crisis in Ethiopia. And unfortunately, many people have died. And what do you call it? There were lots of damage, which is disappointing. So many people are in prison, and some of the most prominent people who were actually expecting to be prime ministers at times are in prison. Because some of them, especially, you know, the young man, he's no more young, was returned from Minnesota. He thought he was even one of the most powerful. He was powerful, to be honest. He was one of the most prominent non-violent activists, but very, very focused on Oromia. He's in prison. Jawar Mohammed, you probably heard the name. Another person in prison was Iskender Nega, another prominent civic leader. So many have been now in prison. But I'm not going to say free X, free Y now, because they have to, as I said, I just want to give this government some time. We have to give them some time so that they have time, the opportunity to have the structures in place, you know, the legal institutions, the police, whatever. But let everybody else go through the due process, and then let them decide, instead of us deciding from a distance. Because I've done some studies on law, so I don't think that's the right thing for me to say now X, free Y. So I think Ethiopia is at what do you call it, at a different stage. But there was one interesting thing for Ethiopia. Despite all the crisis, despite all the challenges been through, there was one interesting unifier that Ethiopia has had in the past couple of years, and especially in the past couple of months. And that was the dam. The dam. It's going to be the biggest dam in Africa. It's called the JERD. You know, I tweet a lot about it. I write a lot about it, because I think it's very important, not only for Ethiopia, but for East and Horn Africa, because it's going to be the biggest hydroelectric plant. And, you know, there are lots of rivers that contribute to it. Uganda, Kenya, Sudan, and many other countries. And they are not benefiting from this thing. It's been going all the way to Egypt. It's been feeding Egypt throughout. But Ethiopia has been working on this project for about 60 years, on and off. But for the past, probably since I think 2011, for about 9 years, it was working on the dam aggressively. And there was a tension between Ethiopia and Egypt, open tension. And the tension actually escalated, especially when America invited itself as a broker, negotiator, deal maker, and whatever. Because, you know, the moment the Trump administration went into this, and then it was a mess. So Ethiopia pushed for this thing to be actually dealt with by the African Union. The African Union it's now the African Union actually that's dealing with this thing. It is because there was a saying, let's find an African solution for this African challenge. And so it's now led by South Africa President who's kind of really leading this thing, which is important. And Ethiopia has got the backing of the countries around, because number one, they will all benefit from the electricity. So the feeling was a challenge, but it's been filled. And Ethiopia was celebrating it yesterday. The whole Ethiopia and the diaspora were celebrating the first feeling. Now, it's all about, the question is all about equitable and fair use of the resources. Let Ugandans, Kenyans, and others use, have equitable share of their resources. That's the ask. And Egypt was benefiting from this, from the deal it had with United Kingdom in 1929 and 1959. That was colonial era, deals, to which Ethiopia was not a signatory. So to which other African countries were not a signatory. I kind of saw one interesting interview. And there are some people you don't support, the likes of Museveni, because of who they are. But his interview on Nile was amazing. If you could find his interview on Nile, most recent interview, I would find and share it. It was amazing. He was just on it. He was just honest on this. So you can see there was some sort of cooperation, proper cooperation, because let's use our resources properly. Now, Ethiopia has filled the dam. The next batch is going to take some time, but it's done what it should have done, and that has united Ethiopians. Despite all the tensions that have been around among Ethiopians, the dam has united us. So that's going to be, I think, enough on my Ethiopian issue, and a bit about, very, very short about the refugee welcome movement in this country, because it's really vital to kind of share that bit as well. Partly because, it's part of my story. I came over, sought asylum. I didn't get my papers on time. I was detained. So I was detained. I left without my family for 8 years. I left without papers for 4 years. I was not allowed to work, and so on and so forth. There are lots. So everything I say is public because it's on the media, it's public normally. So the most recent piece, it's really important for me to speak and speak up because I believe there's a lot we have to do in this country to bring refugees and migrants on board and to kind of empower them. So 2005, as you probably remember, the refugee crisis went from bad to worse. And the Syrian refugee crisis, as you would remember, and then refugees stranded in camps in France, Calais. So there were lots of refugees stranded in camps in Europe, and I had the opportunity to visit some of the camps in Europe, and I said, my God, how could we have such a camp in Europe? Never think that you would have slums and all those things in this part of the world, in Western Europe. And it was one of the ugliest. And we just started to campaign. And the organization I was working for about 10 years now, Citizens UK, wanted to really lead a movement because we are a community organizing organization. Organizing is in our what you call a gift. So how can we organize around an issue, which was the refugee crisis? And luckily, I was tasked to do that. And that really gave me opportunity, number one, to meet with people who are interested in this thing, but who do have different type of stories. And through the process, we were able, number one, to win some, to win something legally, which is important. So we took the government to court. We won as far some of the youngsters who were stuck in France, Calais, were concerned. But at the same time, we thought it was really vital to campaign, as much as possible for those who were stuck in camps around Syria, because the Syrian refugee crisis was getting from bad to worse. And luckily, the government accepted to bring on board 20,000 Syrians, which was good. So as you can see, I'm going to show you my last slide. So as you can see, there was a big a movement called Refugee Welcome Movement. Refugee Welcome here, the one on the right. And then once we had that, that was actually only for 5 years. So the government considered. They said, yes, we are going to welcome refugees. Yes, we are going to have 20,000. And then that was not enough. So we started to campaign again, the one at the bottom, which is extend a welcome. So the extend a welcome was the next part of a refugee welcome movement. And then once we were really certain, then diversification of the welcome. So that's where I work, the one on the top, on the left, which is sponsorship bit, which I actually now lead in the United Kingdom. So my work at UK Welcomes Refugees is actually to kind of lead the sponsorship, which we have in Canada. We have good in the US as well, but very limited, you know. So that's what we do. But now that's not enough for me. The most important thing is still remaining, which is to see refugees and migrants empowered, to see them at the forefront, which is very important because there are lots of people who do have the expertise, who do have, you know, who are intelligent, who have got the stories, who have got everything, but do not have the opportunities. So one of my projects, you know, the project I came to the US, you know, I did at Harvard was about refugee empowerment. So that's where I will be concentrating as I work on my present project. That's where I will be concentrating, you know, and then going to Ethiopia at last, because the final thing is going to be to work in Ethiopia sometimes in the future, probably 5 to 7 years. So, but the most important thing now is to now really lead my new organization, which is important, which is excellently funded by some of the most prominent writers in this world. Very prominent. So we are backed by some important people in this world, which is excellent. Which makes it, there are lots of, you know, unsung heroes, people who kind of step back and support the work we are doing. But I'm really keen for them to invest in refugees and migrants because there are lots of skills. I think with this, I will just stop and take some water and look for your reactions.
Great. So thank you so much, Bekele. It was very inspirational, and I loved hearing about all the history, the broad history of all the movements and the struggles in Ethiopia, and the current situation and your analysis, you know, on where it stands and all the challenges that you guys are having. And then also the work, how you've connected to UK, where you ended up and where your space is, and how much you've done there. And again, not just for Ethiopians, but for the Syrian refugees and others. I keep thinking, I wish I would have had you here in the US when we were trying to push for the Syrians to get in, and we didn't do a good job and they weren't let in. So maybe you would have made that difference. We need to learn from you on that too. So thank you so much. And I'm sure others are gonna have a lot of questions and responses. I wanted to say, and anyone, as we normally do, people kind of raise their hands, sometimes unmute. Let me know also in the chat if you have questions. I know that Beatrice, you had a lot of really good questions as he was speaking. Some things about the constitutionality of a lot of people in prison, about the Roma, who she's in touch with, and some of the activists there, from the Roma group and from their kind of political side that are in prison. And then she also mentions the resistance and how much is it ethnically based. And I think you talked about Prime Minister Abiy and how he's got this connections to several different groups. So how he's really a unifier, but there's still some challenges with that. So I don't know whether Beatrice, you want to ask, those are some general questions I saw you text, but do you want to also ask them in person? And then we have Jeffrey also, he's been with the Human Rights Commission in Kenya. You might also know him from FSI, I'm not sure. So yeah, go ahead, Beatrice. Maybe enlarge upon the questions that you texted that I just mentioned.
Okay, so I was looking at the similarities between the first liberation war. I've read a good book about it called Mukami Kimathi by Wairimu Nderito. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
And I was noticing striking similarities between the resistance years, and we know Ethiopia as a free state. So this left me wondering, if it's really a free state, why all this resistance? Does it come only when we have change of guard? But is it like active resistance, or like a rebirth of what we have with Black Panther, and how they resuscitated their struggle after people like Nina Simone exited the scene back in 2011. Then my second question was the people in jail. Is it constitutional that they are in jail? And how exactly do they go about protesting online and having people to update on what is happening in the jails? Then the third question, I believe you've touched on it. Why does this reflect largely to East Africa? For instance, we know in Rwanda it's an abomination to even talk about or even ask any person you meet in Uganda about their ethnic tribe, whether they are this or that, Hutu or Tutsi. They really tell you we can't talk about that. In Kenya, we know we've had the resistance between three topmost ethnic tribes against one minority tribe, and that is the Luo. Why exactly is this happening? Is it because this particular tribe is known to be ethnically, charged in armed struggles, or what exactly, or why the striking similarities? And the fourth one and the last one, I believe, is it constitutional that they are in jail? Because while all this is happening, while we look forward to have all these people, or the government, as you talked about it, and also the GAD Dam, which I believe has united Ugandans, are we looking into the ecological damages it leaves behind in Lake Turkana, knowing very well that Lake Turkana again draws water from the River Nile, and are these things we can discuss later on in a sitting, and maybe bring people that are activists that are actively working in the northeastern parts of Kenya to have a discussion about it. So you also have a feel about how it feels to be in Kenya, and this lake is drying off because of the GAD project that is uniting Ethiopia to the rest of the continent. So that will be all from my end. And what part of the Constitution supports that these people remain in jail as the government reconstitutes itself? Those are areas I would like you to really concentrate on as you answer, because in Kenya, I have been in jail before, I think twice or thrice. And it's not constitutional to even spend a night here. So you could be talking about a situation that reflects 1978, 1979, 1977, when we had public intellects, the like of Ngugi wa Thiong'o, just arrested, picked like you from the streets of London, by anonymous persons, and then taken to stations where they are told they are not under arrest, and then the anxiety, and then after a while you find yourself permanently in jail. We had people that non-violently protested while they were in jail, the likes of Martin Shikuku. And this constantly sent a message out there, and this also gave the government relevance to keep on defending itself, or why it kept mum on these arbitrary arrests and also jailing of persons that Kenyans relied on in the struggles back then. So it will be interesting to have a comparative response also to that. And also nice to connect with you and hear about your journey and how you ended up in the streets of London and all these things that happened to you. Maybe this is the same kind of thing those people in jail need, this kind of solidarity. So what do we need to overlook at the moment? We are ready to support in Kenya. And about my protest to my internet ISP service provider, in Kenya, it's really open for us to make calls through hotlines and to banks, like I've done that in the last 2 days, to internet service providers or mobile service providers, where you raise a concern about anything and they will respond. And if they do not have an idea, they'll also try and look smart. So I'm also an experienced digital security trainer. And like I mentioned before to Catherine, I'm willing to give a room where we can meet and talk without a limit on how long we can talk. So like not really 45 minutes, but we can go up to 3 hours, 2 hours, 4 hours. So yeah, it's fully paid for. So thank you. That is it from me.
Okay, Bekele, you have a lot. She had a lot of amazing points and questions.
Yeah. It's it's really a very good kind of reflection, to be honest, because she kind of she had a number of questions, some of which are reflection for that matter. The first question is, do we have active resistance in Ethiopia, or why resistance? Ethiopia is a free state, and Ethiopia, even though all the way from the days of 1974, even all the before 1974, even when we had the imperial, there was resistance, and the Oromo Liberation Movement is 50 years old, 50 plus years old. So there has always been kind of resistance somehow, some in some form or other. What used to happen was the imperial would always give something to the leader of the movement. They would either make them, what do you call them, a powerful position somewhere, and then that was the end of it. That was why we had the 1974 protest, because the then government, I mean the imperial, did not deliver on the needs of the poor Ethiopians. It was feudal. It's a feudal government for that matter. So there's always been resistance. And some of this resistance are still around. So the Oromo Liberation Front, it was a liberation front then, 50 years ago. It's still a liberation front today. So it's still in the still in the movement. That's why sometimes, some people have to step back. So it's still even led by some of the founders. So the young generation, who could see life from different angle, and who is affected for that matter, because it is their time. So we are now stealing their time. I'm still young, but we have to make sure that the young generation, the next generation, has better than we have. So there's still resistance by the what do you call it? By the old garks who think it is for them, and unless they are in power, nothing, they never accept change. So there's always been this resistance, and there's always been resistance. And the second bit is Ethiopia, especially before Abiy took charge, was mostly led by ethnic-based politics. The Tigrayan Liberation Front, the Oromo People's Democratic Front, the Amhara movement, the Southern movement, all ethnic-based. So whether you like it or not, you have to actually say, yes, I belong to this ethnic group. And probably, if you want to go up, up in power, you probably have to belong to one of the ethnic group-based political organization. And that's been the cancer. I think that's cancer for that matter, as far as I see it. Because for me, I only see humans first. Because I'm human before anything else. But there are many people in Ethiopia who will tell you, no, I am an Amhara first, I am an Oromo first, I'm a Tigrayan first, and then comes anything else. So the resistance and ethnicity, I kind of mentioned earlier, actually are somehow interconnected, because most of the resistance are ethnic based. Most of the challenges are being ethnic based. And when we had Prime Minister Abiy, he came from the Oromo organization, from Oromo People's Democratic, OPDO, by then, it's Oromo People's Democratic Organization. So he was the chair of OPDO. That was how he could have taken part, because OPDO had the largest seat in amongst the coalition. So they kind of convinced the Amhara movement, and then the two of them could have more than 50%. Mm-hmm. That's how they came to power. So there was some sort of coalition, because they thought, and many Ethiopians thought, including myself, the Tigrayans had the upper hand in Ethiopia. They had everything in Ethiopia for granted, and all the dictatorship that was actually happening in Ethiopia was mostly led by the Tigrayans. And it was mostly Tigrayan-led government, intelligence, the police, almost everything. All the ruthless things that was happening in Ethiopia was Tigrayan-led. So when they lost, or when they were pushed, they have now gone to Tigray. So they are still ethnic, ethnic based. And unfortunately, they haven't even changed their name. They are still a front, Tigrayan People's Liberation Front. Imagine, after being in power for about 17 years, after being in struggle for about 17 years before, which is about 39 years altogether, or 40 years, they are still a front. This is one of the challenges I have. When are you going to stop being a front? When are you going to be a party? When are you going to have a policy? When are you going to actually work around an issue, an idea, than ethnicity, than self-interest? Because this is really vital that we kind of really don't have these things. Because if you are to have this one, then you are going to have religious-based politics at one moment. And the Ethiopian Orthodox Party, the Ethiopian Muslims Party, that's going to be disastrous. That's going to be disastrous, because it's going to be very costly. So the politics in Ethiopia is actually around ethnicity, but Dr. Abiy has disbanded the coalition and changed it into what's called Ethiopia Prosperous Party. So in principle, it's no more ethnic based as far as the party is concerned. It's no more ethnic, and it used to be dominated by only 4 areas: the Tigrayans, the Oromos, the Amharas, and a bit of the south. And it did not, and then it brought all the others as allies and partners. But as I said, Ethiopia is a country of 80 ethnic nations and nationalities, so it did not embrace that. So now there are a few strong, credible opposition parties which are national, which revolve around social and national issues. That's what we need to have in the 21st century. That's what we didn't have. So as the ones, the likes of the leaders of the Oromo Liberation Movement, and the ones who were leading the movement peacefully, even in Minnesota and other places, came to Ethiopia, they thought they were going to be part of the wider movement. But as things didn't work for them, they went into the ethnic circle again. So they just joined, especially Jawa and others joined the Oromo movement. So initially he thought, well, this is a change. This is a change I should be part of. I should even relinquish he has relinquished his U.S. citizenship, because in Ethiopia there's no what do you call it? You can't have a dual citizenship. So I cannot be Ethiopian for that matter, although I want. So that's why. And on the constitutional stuff, earlier I kind of mentioned, I would leave that to the courts to decide on this. But I thought my observation of the past 2 years, as someone from outside and who really wants to give time to the change that was happening and support it somehow, there have been actually many challenging stuff being done by the people who have been now thrown to jail. So sometimes it's tough. It's tough to judge, but we can see from a distance. and partly because some of them wanted actually to disappoint others. That's why they kind of had their own umbrella. But they are somehow hidden around ethnicity. But I don't think, I've got a clear, what do you call it, knowledge to say it's constitutional. But I would just leave it to the Ethiopian judiciary, because I believe the judiciary has to be given the chance to really go through this thing and address it. What else I think this is what you kind of mentioned, Mumbai.
Yeah, actually, Bekele, you've done a great job covering a lot. There are a lot of questions about the dam, which also Beatrice raised. Claude, I think you're unmuted, but we can't hear.
Can I talk?
There you go. Yep. Say hello. And I know you had a question about the dam and the river, and then Yela did as well. So maybe we can kind of combine.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay. Thanks. I'm Claude from DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, and I want to ask a question about the dam project. We know that there is a climate challenge in that region, and the Nile River is considered as the last way to fight that climate challenge. So I want to know if Ethiopian activists are thinking about that to try to consider that environment aspects or the climate aspects in that region. And the second question, it's about the different countries considered as sources of the Nile, because Nile go from east of Africa and central of Africa. Congo is one of the sources of the Nile River. So I want to know if they have in that project activists from Ethiopia have tried to insist on people, on the interests of people around lakes or rivers, which are exactly sources of Nile. Most of those people are poor, are living in insecurity. I want to know if that project has considered all those aspects. And the last question is almost about the new elected Premier Minister of Ethiopia. When he was elected, it was like the last chance of social justice and democracy in Ethiopia. So I want to know if we can keep considering that, or if things have changed. That's my preoccupation. Is the Premier Minister remain a chance or a hope for social justice and democracy in Ethiopia?
Okay, so Claude is with the Lucha movement. They're doing all kinds of work across DRC right now. And so, yeah, he presented earlier in this series. So yeah, we'll go ahead and let Bekele go ahead and answer. Those were some great questions.
This is a really important question for us. Source of the Nile, the poor farmers, the rivers are feeding the Nile. These are important for people like me. This is what we have been asking: equitable share of the river. One of the videos we have been sharing in the past few days, I even shared it yesterday, and I'll share a link here. Just asks for that. Jet should be African, because it just originates from Africa. And Africans, all African countries that are contributing to it should benefit. So somehow or other, they should at least get something. That is the call. Because they are all contributing. And sometimes the poor farmers don't have power to negotiate. Oh, the countries where these farmers live, may not have a stable government that's going to really fight for them, or it might be preoccupied with something else. So the first call we have is, how can we make sure the dam, as we see it, is for the ones who are actually giving it? So let me just bring a link to this. Okay, something in my language for those who don't know, but I think you can see at least the video. I'm going to share a video. This is the post I posted yesterday on social media, and the video is in English. And if you see the video, it will just tell you everything how we are actually campaigning. When you click, you are going to find the video. The video is in English, transcribed properly. You will see how we are campaigning. We want to make sure all who are actually, even though that's why it is the biggest dam. So how can we make sure we export cheap electricity to the countryside of, whether it is Kenya or Uganda or wherever possible, wherever they demand? How can we share the resources? But at the same time, how can we help others to can really engage in proper fishery, water market, and so on and so forth? And then the second question he has was about, I think, yeah. So Abi, is there a chance or hope? He's still my hope, to be honest. I'm 51, and it's not easy, because I really want to see change. I really want to see a democracy. I really want to see people elect the government leading Ethiopia in my lifetime. And I believe it takes time. I believe we need to have patience. I trust him, for that matter. But I'm not going to say he is perfect. There are lots of challenges, but we are not all perfect. That's what's important. So how can we really support him and support that government, so that they actually go from, learn from their challenge, at the same time, learn also from their strengths? And how can we manage our expectation as well? So managing, not actually, I should manage my expectations. What can he do? What can his government do in a short span of time? How many years can I give him? So I would give him at least 5 years, 5 more years. And then I would say, okay, that's enough, but I can trust him. I was lucky. I've met him in person as well. But, for me, I have seen some, some honesty and decency and true humanity. And that's what I want from a prime minister, because I have a chance to meet a prime minister also in this country. So you see different personalities in this. So I want to give him time. Any questions? Social justice is part of the bag game.
Yeah. The last one, but Andrew has a really important one. Andrew, it's also around the dam. Do you want to go ahead and ask your question? Can I unmute?
Yes, sure. It's related to the dam, and I wrote that it's been a source of military tensions between downstream and upstream countries. This is based on the controversy stems from colonial agreements that gave rights to Egypt and Sudan. Sorry, Egypt and Ethiopia, the rights of usage. While others like Uganda and Sudan contend that this is a post-independence era, so we cannot rely on colonial treaties. And this has actually caused these tensions to lead to increased military spending. Yoweri Museveni of Uganda drained the foreign reserves of the Bank of Uganda to acquire fighter aircraft in anticipation of a confrontation. I'd like to know what your thoughts are on this issue, because it's been presented, and rightly so, as a climate issue, which is also valid. But I think we also have to think about the implications on the hydropolitics, so to speak, and the potential for war. Thanks.
Stephen, yeah. So, first of all, to kind of make correction, because the argument was between United Kingdom and Egypt and Sudan, both the 1929 and the 1959.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So Ethiopia was not included. And unfortunately, from the video I shared with you, that 80% of the water comes from Ethiopia. But there are many feeding rivers. So Ethiopia has been proposing all the countries that are contributing have to benefit somehow from this. But there have been tension, and there was a big tension, and there's still big tension between Ethiopia and Egypt. As what do you call it? As Uganda has been preparing, I would assume Ethiopia has been preparing for this as well, because I could see how they were preparing, because there was a big tension between Ethiopia and Egypt, and that's why it went all the way to the Security Council, and Ethiopia was saying no, it should not go to Security Council. It should not go to. We should have an African solution for this. That's why it's come back to African Union. But the tension is still there. But despite all the tensions, Ethiopia has been building it. And what makes it even more interesting is it was not built by the money we got from the World Bank or anybody else. It's Ethiopians who paid for that. I paid. Every one of us paid. It's our own money. That's why earlier I kind of mentioned that's why it kind of unifies us. It's a unifier. So, but it's vital that we negotiate. It's vital we keep talking, and then having Abiy as prime minister for a few more years, as I really want to see, is really helpful, because he is actually very much connected with most of the leaders around, and we can negotiate properly, because it's vital we negotiate. But at the same time, what's going to be the impact on climate change? It's massive. Ethiopia has taken climate change very seriously. Probably had planted more trees than most countries in the world in a short span of time. It's about to be to plant 4 billion trees very soon. So it's a massive commitment in Ethiopia, because it's vital that we have something for the next generation. That's what we have.
Yeah, to me it's so interesting, because as we know, everyone's saying, water is the next oil. I mean, water is going to be the most important resource for everyone in the world. And I think that, we're seeing how it's driving conflicts. As I mentioned, the Mekong River in the Amazon now, in Brahmaputra, an area with Nepal and India, and that whole river system, and also now with the Nile. So thanks, Bekele, for, all these issues of how many countries it will impact, the issues of trying to get electricity and bring up poverty and economies, but at the same time, looking at the environmental impact, how it affects poor people. So there are just so many, aspects of it, which have come up in the discussion.
Yeah, there are about 10 countries, that are contributing somehow, and they are all forgotten. And so Ethiopia has been saying now, it's no more, we can no more tolerate one party wins all.
Yeah.
No, it can no more happen. So everybody has to get something. Equitable share. That's what it is. Equitable share is important.
Yeah. Oh, and Vedran, I'm sorry, Vedran has his hand raised. Why don't you go ahead, Vedran? You might have a final either question.
Yeah, hello. I'm a bit in a hurry. But I wanted to thank Bekele for this. This was really interesting. I've been researching a bit about the Nile Dam. So your perspective is really helping, especially because we are receiving a lot of one-sided information. And I did have a lot of questions, in fact, but I didn't want to disturb the discussion, and particularly because you put you've put a picture of some Ethiopian athletes, and I wanted to ask you: do you reach out to them? Do you reach out to some student organizations, to the religious groups, etc.? But this will be a thing for another time. So thank you, and I hope to stay in touch. I will have to go now. I have a liturgy in 5 minutes, so I'm a bit in a hurry. So goodbye, everyone. Thank you.
Well, I've connected with the athlete most recently, and he's back in Ethiopia. And the students and others, it's not easy because Ethiopia is a very big country, as you would know. So some of the connections are not there.
Yeah, and I remember that, like you said, the one at the Olympics. I remember that the signs that they had, and it was very impactful. That's the you know, as we know, a major tactic of nonviolent resistance is having some.
It was powerful.
Yeah, it's really powerful, and it's symbolic. Is can bring a country together at key times, I think, and also allies, you know, around the world. So yeah, I'm glad you shared that part. Let's see. Let's go to Andrew next. Andrew, just any closing words or comments?
Well, it's to really thank Bekele for his presentation. Very helpful learning and sharing that has been on the group here. Yeah, really, thank you. It's been helpful. I have taken quite an amount of notes here. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Fikiri, you're next.
Yeah, thank you to Bekele for this amazing presentation. I learned a lot, things that I didn't know, especially around, you know, this current issue with the dam. So you tried to give more explanation. So now I have a sense of what is really happening there. So we only wish Ethiopia will, you know, keep on developing itself, and also, but maybe one small question that I have for you is, you know, this singer that was recently killed and the prime minister, it seems like they are from the same tribe, right? Or they are, or is it Oyomo or Oromo?
Yes,
Okay,
same group. Okay.
Okay, there are some. So the question that I was asking, because we know that this person was an activist, and mostly when we try to see in African countries, activists are mainly targeted by, you know, government structures, police or soldiers. So I would like to know, he's from the same tribe as the prime minister. He was an activist. So do you think, who do you think had interests in eliminating him?
Well, I personally, I think outsiders. When I say outsiders, the same ethnic group, because, you know, killing him, they thought, that's the thinking I have, would provoke unrest, and through that, people would actually come to power. Because the day after his death, there were lots of actually Oromo protesters who were demanding for burial to happen in Addis. And for that to happen, very close to, you know, the church, very close to the palace. They knew hundreds of thousands of people would come, probably a million, because he is a galvanizer. So people would come, and they probably thought they could use the opportunity for something else. So that's why some people were arrested the next day.
Okay, thank you.
And some of the interviews he actually made a few days before his death tell a lot. They are in American, unfortunately. They should be translated into English and other languages. They tell a lot. And I don't have no single I don't suspect the government at all. It's my first time not suspect the government.
Could I just follow up on that, Bekele? Because I think Fikiri raises such an important point. This idea that as major change is happening, there are always going to be these spoilers who are losing power, who want to get in the way. You know, Israel, Palestine, I've worked on for years. It's always the issue there. Is there a lot of strategizing going on? Kind of ideas about how to stop those spoilers? Because you know they're coming, you know they're going to be there. Is that happening between a lot of, you know, alliances and peace builders, and how, just a little bit about that, because we know that's going to happen.
Yeah, so, you know, there's tension. Earlier, Mumbai kind of mentioned about, you know, ethnic-based tension. It is there. So the ones who have lost power, are strategizing to come back. then they will use every opportunity, because as I said, they actually had everything. They had money, they had everything, and they still have military resources, even based in Tigray. So they will find every way. So to see, two groups that were kind of really enemies uniting on this issue, it's a big question. But at the same time, there are many other Ethiopians who are strategizing. How can we come out of this thing? Because it's vital that's one of the reasons I say I myself say, okay, let's give the court time. Let's see and then challenge. Because if we are all to kind of say, do this, do that, then when are they going to do what they are meant to do? So, but there are people waiting for opportunities. And the killing, I just believe the killing was intentionally done because there have been killings. There have been killings of actually even some senior government officials, but it didn't bring as much crisis as this one, because he was most prominent, comes from the same ethnic group, and many people are, I am half, and I don't speak Oromo language for that matter. Although many people think I would speak, but I listen to his music. You see, for me, he was a unifier, and killing him, I was so sad. So many people were, and what happened was activists were trying to use the emotions around to destroy, and through the process, go to Arat Kilo, where the palace is.
Beatrice, you're next. I think you have a question or a comment. We'll let you go next.
Yes, good evening. I would just would love to observe and reflect on nationhood and the essence of social justice. And it's really sad for me this evening to hear that Abiy Mohammed is doing whatever he's doing deliberately, because Ethiopians, or a major fraction of Ethiopians, want this kind of change. And unfortunately, or fortunately, there has to be a number of people that lose their lives and also end up in jail. So that is also quite disturbing. It's not in my best interest to hear that I would be comfortable having an activist in jail, and especially because they fight for the common good. It has also been brought to our attention that the intent is something that should be questioned. So it's interesting to observe that we've had sufficient information on the different fronts that try to bring a tipping point for Ethiopians to revolt, given on all factors held constant, the population and the populace and the persons that are in power, and also the distribution of resources. However, I have a question. Is Ethiopia a democratic state? Is Ethiopia a democratic state? And number two, what chance for democracy does Ethiopians have, and inclusivity for that matter? And is it time now that we start having the Benjamin Kappa's, a group of old persons, mediators that passed on a while back? Benjamin passed on last week, and we previously had Kofi Annan, who passed on last year. Is it time that this initiative, the Global Pan-Africanist for Grassroots Women, not grassroots women, but grassroots activists, consider working on some mediation kind of thing? Because I believe the women are suffering more. Women are suffering. It's crazy. I was in Ethiopia last year, and one of the things that really got my head going wild is seeing a lady from the streets borrowing 5 shillings, equivalent to Ethiopian shillings, and I was like, why 5 shillings? And I was told it's because that is enough to buy her injera. So let's also not be ignorant to the fact that a lot of social injustices are happening, and we've had our elitist privileges from the different exposures we've had. So it's disturbing that we have another Yoweri Kaguta Museveni. You know, the Yoweri who wrote The Mustard Seed is very different from the dictator we have today. So it's depressing that we have that. I think I could use psychosocial support. But it's okay. I'm glad you get the point.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I'm making ugali. I'm making ugali here. Ugali is, let me turn on my video. Ugali is sima. Sima is
like a corn thing, yeah?
that one.
Oh my God.
Yeah. I remember having
Yes.
that when I was
Welcome.
in Nairobi with you guys. Yeah.
You liked it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Actually. Thanks for sharing. Okay, Bekele.
Everybody dinner.
Yeah, that's true. It's late there. It's dark there. Do you want to respond? And then I'm not sure whether Mumbi Ruth can get on, whether we can hear or not, but go ahead and respond maybe to Beatrice's comments and final question.
Yeah, first of all, I kind of like that ugali, and I miss it because we don't have that very often. My wife used to live in Kenya, and I used to come to Kenya many times in the good old days. Ethiopia is not a democracy, but it's on road to democracy. That's how I say it. We have never had democracy. Democracy for me is participation, and participation on your own initiative. Participation without being bribed. Participation in local democracy, electing who you want, being there to be elected freely. So it's not happening. It's been a dictatorship, and Abiy was trying to bring that, but it's still a challenge. So we were meant to have an election in August, the first democratic election, which postponed because of COVID-19. COVID-19. So God knows when the elections went to happen. The first time ever we had, Ethiopia, to be very frank on this, we has more women than men, but women were not actually leading Ethiopia. We have never had a prime minister, Ethiopian women prime minister, Ethiopian president. The first time we have Ethiopian president is during Abiy's time, and I'm really grateful to him. The first time we have more than now 50% of cabinet women is under Abiy, which I'm really grateful to see, because I have got due respect, because we are all equal. And coming from this patriarchal society, who think the men are always the best, it just disappoints me. So we have seen all those things, and that was very promising. That's why I was saying I have to give him some time, because he has shown me practically more than 50%. We don't have that in the United Kingdom where I live. So in a very mature democracy, it was really good to kind of connect folks from mostly Africa, and Catherine from the US, and then my friend from Israel, to kind of share actually what's happening, but at the same time learn from you all. I think it's really important that we kind of really find time and resources to support one another. When I was actually working on diaspora issues, and when I was not even allowed to go back to Ethiopia for my political opinion, one of my best wishes was actually, how can I help another African country? Because there's always something with us, and there's always something we can contribute. And I think we have to think about all those things as we kind of build a strong diaspora movement. But at the same time, how can we, I know Andrew now lives in South Africa. That's what he said earlier. So he is a diaspora in South Africa. Bekele is in the US, so he's still a diaspora. And how can we use these resources to, in a situation where we cannot use our resources, our expertise, our knowledge, our connections in our home country? How can we use that in countries elsewhere? Because by the end of the day, it's all about giving. Knowledge, if not shared, is not knowledge for me. Experience, if not shared, is not experience. It's just useless.
Yes,
it's not. I'm not really keen to be encyclopedia of everything without sharing it. So I should find ways to share it, and at least for the benefit of some countries, some activists, or folks who are around. So I thought I've learned a lot because people are doing some research. People are actually really keen to know because they want to contribute. But at the same time, we have to remember that there is what we normally call self-interest. So I can see, people saying talking about GERD, and then its environmental impact on the poor in let's say in DRC for that matter, all those things. So that's why we have to interconnect. We have to connect and interconnect, and then talk about all those things because this is a world which is interdependent, as I see it.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And again, as you said, I think the diaspora is incredibly important. There's another part of our network, Cedric, who is from Cameroon, who's working now in Liberia, Uganda on farming, for instance, on grassroots farming, and he's connecting. And I can think of so many people, as you said, the resources, you mentioned the TV station, but the satellite that's based in the US. Again, right now in Egypt and Iran are two places I can think of where they've got similar situations where they're struggling internally, but the diaspora is helping with getting news in and different perspectives. So let's think about, again, the Solidarity 2020 is just beginning, just building. The ideas, your ideas are driving it. And so maybe there's a really important working group that could be formed around the diaspora. Everyone, together we're better, and we'll see everyone next week. And if you have ideas, to put in writing about something with the diaspora, either some field research, some activist support networks, whatever you would have in mind, let me know and let us know, and we can help support that.